welcome to this week's episode of Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jake LaQuire. We have a lot to get into, and we'll start where we typically start, and that's with another Panthers loss in Washington. I know this was a game you thought we had a chance to potentially win going into the week, but after the pick six on the opening drive and then almost the 50-yard run from Jaden Daniels on the first play for the Washington Commanders offense, it just seemed like nothing was going right, and it was a landslide by the end of it. What was the key takeaway in a positive light? Because there weren't many to take away from with this game.
And I actually think we did have a chance, even with the pick six, even after that 50-yard run. If you look at the first quarter itself, the defense held firm pretty much, other than the big run. At total yards, we had 81 in the first. They had 90. And 47 of those were off of the Jaden Daniels keeper and ran around, got past Nick Scott, who I'm not sure what he was doing. And he got ran down by Lonnie Johnson, who I think made a lot of plays today. He had the really sick punt down where he jumped in behind the back, did that. So he's making a lot of plays. That's one positive. I'd like to see him on the field more, especially with our poor safety play. But that's it. After that, it's pretty much all negative. It ends up being 40-7, I believe is the correct score. Just really, really horrible execution on offense, on defense. Special teams, I think, took a downturn as well, especially with Raheem Blackshear injured now. I think he had 2 fumbles on returns. One of them was recovered. But you can just look at it, the interception here from Andy Dalton, just some awful stuff. This was the second one where Deontay Johnson had a miscommunication with him. Emmanuel Forbes, a guy who had been benched, who's on the field for this play, comes away with the pick. And then the other one, he just throws a pick six to Dante Fowler Jr. He couldn't have walked over and handed it to him more cleanly than the way he threw it to him. Just completely missed Miles Sanders. And that really killed the potential of the game to me. That drive, we were moving the ball pretty well. The run was getting established by Chuba. He was churning out yards in that drive. Jatavion Sanders had a big role in that drive. He's another positive today. He had 6 catches, no drops. So catching-wise, that's another positive. But after that, all downhill. And there's not really a ton to take away from this game. I wrote a couple of notes down when I rewatched it because we were out celebrating a friend's birthday during that game. So good thing we didn't get to watch the game in full. But Ian Thomas, I was told he was this elite blocker. He can't block anymore. It was on the drive where we got stuffed on 4th and 1 where he whiffed 2 consecutive blocks that killed that drive. Jatavion Sanders, good catching the ball, but there are a couple of times where he didn't fight for extra yards. One time he just fell down. That was early in the first quarter. It was the rollout from Andy Dalton, similar play that Bryce had to Tremble versus the Chargers, but he caught it and just kind of fell down. When Bryce was in the game, he caught a 1-yard pass and kind of just fell down, even though he had 3 or 4 more yards to get. J.C. Horn throwing his arms up, there should have been a coverage sack. Horn was strapping up McLaurin for 5, damn near 6 seconds. No sack there. Got pieced by Marcus Mariota. It feels like Miles Sanders is on the field every 3rd down. Again, not sure what that's about. And the big one for me was, and this was during the halftime break. This was a CBS coverage game, so it's Bill Cowher, Matt Ryan, all those guys. Both of those guys, Cowher and Ryan in particular, were talking about Bryce Young because that was a big focus on the broadcast. Andy Dalton was playing horrible. Are we going to see Bryce Young at all? The sideline reporter said that Canales and the Panthers said he would only come in the game if it's really late. We have a plan for Bryce. And both Cowher and Matt Ryan were yeah, I kind of get not playing him in this game. If you want to play him, give him a full week of preparation to start him, right, for the next game. But yesterday, Monday, Dave Canales in his presser says Andy Dalton's our guy going forward. And I liked how you put it in the title. I didn't know you were going to do that in the little intro card. These are hypotheticals when it comes to Bryce Young and trade talk and any of that. So I think that's the main takeaway from this game is hypotheticals. We're in the hypothetical game now, baby. We're 1-6. What are we going to do now? And I'll say this, at least we got our 1 win earlier than we did last year. But this time last year, granted we had a bye week, we were also 1-6. And we had just come off of our first win against CJ Stroud and the Texans. So you got to look at it that way.
There's a lot to look at between Reich's regime early on in the last year and then early on in the Canales' tenure here in Carolina. He said a lot of poor things or worded things very poorly.
Coach speak, kind of.
And it only goes so far. Like when you keep just running out these redundant statements like, well, these trade rumors concerning Bryce are all hypotheticals. You're absolutely right. But like, is this a guy that you've lost trust in? Are you looking to move on? And obviously you can't say that in a press conference, because if you say you've lost trust, then your negotiating price just drops. Like you lose leverage in those situations. And then in-game situations where he talks to, well, we need to get back to basics, but not be too simple that you're predictable. On the 4th and 1, you run the same fullback dive to Chuba Hubbard that you've been doing the past several weeks in short yardage situations. The defense was ready for it. They watched the film. They knew who exactly was getting the ball, and they made the play. And that's where you have to understand as a play caller, I need to have a pitch out the Miles Sanders here. I need to have a play action or a quick pass design that's going to catch the defense off guard. And there's none of that layering. So between the poor, just incessant coach speak and talk at the podium now, the results that are on the field, which we can get more into that. We want to talk about worst performances this year. The two worst performances, single game performances this year, according to DVOA, the first one, the Panthers at New Orleans in week 1. And then this past week when the Panthers are at the Commanders. Like, that's insane. Like, the two worst performances we're looking at, and when we look at team performances using EPA or expected points added, these are the two worst performances in franchise history dating back to 2011. Over the last 14 years, 7 of which Tepper's been the owner. Like, this is crazy. Like, the games that we've had in the top 30 worst performances as a franchise, we have more of those games through less than half a year this year than we did all of last year. And everybody was clamoring for Reich's head and this, that, and the third, that we weren't doing what we needed to surround our quarterback of the future with the right pieces. And I don't see how Canales is doing that, especially when he ditched the Bryce train 2 weeks into the season. And that was his selling card when he was hired.
Yeah, and what sticks out to me, right? You said we already have more. We have 5 of those games this year, as you've highlighted, and only 3 last year. What sticks out to me is obviously 2 of those weeks for Bryce this year. 3 of them were Andy Dalton, the steady hand, the guy that's going to come in and run the offense. Well, yeah, he did it versus the Raiders, but as it's been discussed, like to no end, that was like a perfect trap game for them. They had just beaten a team they shouldn't have beaten in Baltimore off of a last-second field goal. They're coming back riding hot, and then the plucky Panthers with a new QB come in and stomp them. And then every other game since then, it's been pretty bad, other than the Bengals game. But 3 of those other games, pretty bad. And looking at a player performance, quarterback in particular, Andy Dalton this past week had negative 0.9 EPA per dropback. That means every time you took a dropback, we almost lost an expected point on that drive. So you're not going to win games if every time you drop back, it's like, oh, this is going to be a negative play. You could dirt it, and it would be a better score than that. Lowest QBR for a quarterback in a single game this season at 3.2. And I know QBR isn't the end-all, be-all of like quarterback performance or anything. All these metrics and stuff have flaws in them, but it's the single game performance by far, or worst single game performance by far, at 3.2. Bryce's lowest was the Chargers game at 6.6. So it's not necessarily twice as worse as that game, but it's still really bad. The other people on that list were Skylar Thompson, who isn't going to be playing for the Dolphins anytime soon. They'd rather throw Tua, who's coming off of IR, out there, even though I think it'd be a bit wiser for him to rest a bit than have Skylar Thompson go back out there. And the quarterback in Cleveland who just tore his Achilles was on there twice as well. So really horrible quarterbacking performances. And you know what? Bryce wasn't the worst. It was Andy Dalton this week. That was the single worst quarterback performance of the year for a game. And going forward, it's just really hard to put that out there and say that this is what's going to lead us to wins, especially when you have guys in the locker room now like Deontay Johnson saying, well, I can't play all 11 positions. I think that was in regard to the interception. But again, I think he only had 4 targets this game. Mm-hmm. Xavier Legette, 1 target. Jalen Coker, 1 target. I don't think Mingo had any targets, but you need to get your players involved. And if you're not going to do that, then I'm not sure why Andy Dalton continues to be the guy out there. You won the locker room the first time with the switch, Dave Canales, but if you're putting forth performances where Dalton, the 36, going to be 37 years old in 7 days, actually, so early happy birthday to him. If he's going to be 37 years old, performing at the level or worse than the 23-year-old guy who you have to see if you still have something in there, I don't know why he's still out there. Maybe Bryce's agents are like, yo, you don't need to play any more this season. We're going to get you up out of there. Look at what Baker's doing now. Look at what Darnold's doing now. It's the Panthers. We're going to get you out of there. So just sit tight. I don't know, but something's got to change because Tom Brady's not walking through the door to save us, right? Something has to change. And maybe, I don't know, maybe Bryce is the answer. Look at what he did last year and compare it to the first 2 weeks of this season. Seems like they kind of neutered him. I talked about how they Markel Fultzed him, like they broke him down to try to build him into something else, but kind of took away his superpowers.
Yeah, to an extent, I can definitely see that. And we're going to have to see if we see Bryce Young anytime soon this season. But I really want to harp on the point of Canales because in that press conference, he made the statement that, hey, the offense was kind of clicking, kind of getting in the rhythm, so to speak, the week before. Like, I don't care what was happening at home against the Falcons and how there were opportunities to win the game there. You got the doors blown off you this past game. They drove past the 50-yard line on that first drive where you had the pick six. They never crossed the 50-yard line again until the fourth quarter when they drove down and scored with Chuba Hubbard. At that point, the game's already over. Like they're up 4+ scores. Like that's just garbage time touchdown.
And I don't mean to cut you off. A game where they kept Andy Dalton in like 6 or 7 drives until to get to that point to get like pity points, then threw Bryce in on the last drive. And we look at the Bears game where it's like we wanted to get Andy Dalton out of there with backup O linemen who are starting now and get Bryce meaningful reps. Didn't do it at all until it was 40-7 in this game.
Well, to me, it's more just you can't excuse that kind of performance. To not be able to move the ball at all against the Washington Commanders and then go, hey, Andy Dalton's our guy. When you turned on the film and said Bryce isn't good enough on film. Well, Dalton's not good on film. Like he's not making good decisions. He's clearly not able to move the ball. And when you look at the efficiency numbers since he took over, we're 25th as an offense and expected points added per play. We're 15th in success rate, and a large part of that is driven by the run game because when we isolate the drop back offense, the efficiency per play drops to 26th, and the success rate is the same, 26th. We are more efficient when we're running the ball, and that has nothing to do with who's at quarterback and Andy Dalton. I don't understand it. I don't get it. I'm not necessarily saying Bryce is going to be better, but when that's your selling card and when you turn to the backup because the guy you invested all this draft capital in isn't the answer and you still don't have a productive offense and the only selling card we have on this team moving forward is the offensive line, I don't know. It is very hard to get behind this team right now just because some of the moves they've made and how they've gone about answering different questions, whether it's been in season or in the off season, have just been terrible.
Yeah. And as far as getting new people in there to help, hopefully we can get people coming off IR like Jonathan Brooks. They activated his window last week, I believe. So maybe he plays this week. I don't know. We'll see if we can be stubborn about the run game. I noticed after that first drive and we're down 7-0 and then subsequently on the next drive where they drove down and kicked the field goal. I also got to give credit to the defense there for not folding after Jaden Daniels ran 50 yards down the field. Not a lot of run game after that until it was already out of hand on that final scoring drive that you were talking about. Then they started to hammer Chuba runs to get down the field, to get those feel-good moral victory points, as I like to say. I just don't get it. You talked about the quarterback doesn't affect the run game. He certainly calls more runs when Andy Dalton's back there. Even if you're not getting blown out like in the Chargers game, Chuba didn't touch the ball much. I think only 12 rushes that entire game when it was still a close game well into the third. So not sure there. Maybe Jonathan Brooks will spur him to run the ball more, call more runs. I don't know. And I can't even blame it on Austin Corbett and Taylor Moton not being there because Brady Christensen has done an admirable job at center so far. And I think Josh Nijman's held up as well. I'm not a big PFF grade guy, but Brady Christensen, each week he's been the starter, has been one of our top 3 graded players both weeks. So really good performance from him. Hopefully, like we're saying, the O-line in the run game is something to build off of in the next couple of games. But we're going to be facing a Broncos defense, which is very, very stout, especially in the pass game. So we're going to have to run the ball. But I think we're getting a little bit ahead. The main takeaway following not the game, but that Canales press conference and the locker room comments and all of that. I have on our notes here, I know you weren't a big Call of Duty Zombies guy, but I have a little pop-up down here. After you kill the zombies in the game, sometimes they drop these little perks that you can grab, and this is the fire sale one. That's when the mystery box is free. So are we going to have a fire sale? Like, what are we doing here? Is Deontay Johnson up for grabs? All the comments in the locker room. Is Chuba Hubbard up for grabs with Jonathan Brooks coming back? Is Miles Sanders up for grabs? Who knows? Do you think we're going to see any or a few important pieces traded before the deadline this year?
I think if you can get a third or higher for Deontay Johnson, I mean, his locker room comments in regards to, I can't play all 11 positions. I can't make a play all over the field. I can only do my part. It's just, he understands what this year is. And if he's got to play out the rest of this year, I don't see him and his agent re-signing with us. There's nothing that's keeping him tied down to Carolina. And so if you can get something now for him for the 2025 draft, why not? Like, the biggest thing it will be a detriment to if Deontay Johnson is shipped out is it forces Xavier Legette into that number one role. And that could mean he faces that number one cornerback a lot more often. And he already has issues with separating. So does he get the ball more? Is he able to kind of build on some of the rookie performances we've seen up until this point? And that would be my biggest concern if he gets shipped out. I don't know if Miles Sanders is at this point. I don't know if we ship out nearly as many guys as we'll end up cutting in the offseason, but there is a lot of words, not only about Deontay Johnson, but Bryce Young being potentially shipped out. And until something materializes, until there's actual price tags on the table, for me, I don't think the Panthers are going to ship out Bryce Young if it's not for a third-round pick or higher. And I think a lot of teams are offering day 3 picks, and that's the kind of disconnect. With Deontay Johnson, I do think that with the Amari Cooper and now the Devontae Adams trades happening, you get that third-round pick. He's the guy that will probably be dealt.
But until then, these are all hypotheticals, right? It's a good
because it's Dan Morgan and Brant Tillis. Dave Canales has nothing to do with these conversations.
That's true. I'm sure David Tepper has nothing to do with these conversations either. I think that's a good way to wrap up the Panthers game and how humiliating it was to rewatch. But going to around the NFL, we're going to do a bit more traditional this week, looking at a couple of games we wanted to highlight. The first two being in that 1 p.m. window. They both ended with last-second field goals, but the first one was a huge division matchup, the Detroit Lions at the Minnesota Vikings in the new-ish stadium. And it was a barn burner, especially in that second half. There were turnovers, a lot of turnovers. Multiple 11-point leads were blown by the Lions, I believe. It came down to the field goal, and the Lions won with the seconds of the clock ticking down. But it was a really, really good game, and I know you wanted to highlight kind of what Ben Johnson was able to do in this game scheme-wise, especially versus Flores' scheme, because Jared Goff kind of looked impervious, and early in his career when he was getting pressured and stuff, he wasn't like that.
No, and Jared Goff obviously had a lot of success against Brian Flores. Last year, he has improved against the blitz with his time with Ben Johnson. But when you go back to his time with Sean McVay and the Los Angeles Rams, a lot of times if the pocket collapsed, the first and second read weren't there, he would panic, and that's when something bad would happen. Well, all of a sudden now, Ben Johnson has it schemed up, and obviously phenomenal offensive line in Detroit where you can run how you want to run, you can pass how you want to pass. But Jared Goff, when he was pressured on Sunday against the Lions, had answers. He had outlets, and that goes to show just how good of a play caller Ben Johnson is when he can give his quarterback answers to the problems he's facing in real time and not be stuck after your first or second read that we see so many quarterbacks struggle with nowadays. So that's really great to see. Goff is definitely putting his name in kind of contention for MVP talk, and we'll get more into that next week. I don't think he's there. For me, he's like the Brock Purdy this year, maybe even Dak Prescott, where he's really, really efficient. He's got a great supporting cast, and they're one of the better teams in the conference. So those things kind of help boost a player stock when we have these conversations. So I don't know if there's too much more to get into with Ben Johnson. I was impressed with Aaron Glenn and how that defense responded after losing Aiden Hutchinson. I had picked the Vikings to win this game because I thought the Hutchinson injury would be almost insurmountable, that it would take a couple weeks to kind of like really figure out their identity. And while they struggle to generate pressure, when you see what guys like Brian Branch are doing on the back end and making spectacular play after spectacular play, like that's what's going to keep you in games. That's what's going to keep you as a contender in the NFC when we see some of the bigger juggernauts over the past couple of years kind of fall apart between the 49ers, the Eagles, the Cowboys, and really open up this window for a team that is really hitting its stride going into kind of the halfway point.
Yeah, they kind of stole a touchdown from Brian Branch there. I still don't think the Minnesota guy was out of bounds, but he's been playing phenomenal all year, not just in light of Aiden Hutchinson's absence. I think he's really making a case for Defensive Player of the Year if he can rack up more picks. I think he's up to 4 now and a couple more touchdowns. It's kind of insane to think that Xavier McKinney, I think, who is still leading the league, at least from a safety perspective in interceptions, Brian Branch and Minkah Fitzpatrick are all some of the best safeties in the league, all of them coming from Nick Saban, who was a defensive backs guy himself. You know, he was like a great head coach and coordinator, but his starting point was defensive backs, and he's always coached up good safeties. So it's pretty cool seeing that. The last thing I want to note on that game is you talk about Goff's efficiency. Over the last 4 weeks, they have scored more touchdowns, the Detroit Lions, that is, 18, than Goff has thrown incompletions. So they're firing on all cylinders on offense right now. And if the defense can keep up, I think this is easily the best team in the NFC, and it's going to be hard to stop them. But the Vikings did do a good job, and they came close. I do think the Hutchinson thing had a lot to do with it, though. Another team in that division, though, that had a barn burner game. Where
the Lions play both of these teams in this game over the next 3 weeks. So very interesting that we talk about this matchup.
Oh, they play Houston as well?
It'll be the Titans this week, but then they'll be at Lambeau, and then I don't know if they're at Houston or Houston's coming to them. But
Houston and Green Bay, another game-winning field goal. I think didn't Houston go down and kick a field goal, and then they left time, and then Green Bay drove down and got one. Yeah, another barn burner. Without Nico Collins, I think C.J. Stroud has taken a little bit of a step back. I think this year was a pretty giant step back from what he did as a rookie. But he struggled a bit in this game, 10 for 21, only 86 yards. But luckily, Joe Mixon on the ground really carried the load for them. Over 100 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. But it wasn't enough to get past Jordan Love's new Brett Favre era, I guess. He's going to throw 3 touchdowns. He's going to throw 2 picks. But they got the win in spite of all the variance that he brings to the table now as a second-year starter.
Yeah, it's a give and a take when you talk about players that are able to generate explosives, but they also come with a lot of negative plays and finding that balance. And Matt LaFleur has done that juggling act fairly well over the past year and a half with Jordan Love at the helm. And they played a really good game, clawed their way back in. But to me, what stood out most was the Packers defense. They were able to kind of generate pressure with different simulated pressures and even blitzes. And the Texans offensive line, as battered as they were last year with injuries, I think held up better last year than they're doing this year. They're getting beat on basic stunts. And if you aren't able to pick up some of these different simulated pressures or blitz looks and give CJ Stroud the time he needs to make some of these plays downfield, I think it starts to become an issue. And what we saw with Nico Collins last year, he was healthy all throughout last year and played at, I want to say, close to an all-pro level. Like he was playing really well. And then this year, I think he was leading the league in yards per route run up until his injury. So getting him back this year is definitely going to help that team. I think figuring out how to play ball without a star wide receiver is really key right now for the Texans offense. Figuring out how to really combine the run and pass, get Mixon involved, because up until this past week, Mixon hadn't looked all that great with the Texans run game. He had a couple spurts, but nothing to really hang your hat on. So finding that balance, getting better as a team, I think is really the priority for the Texans, why they wait for Nico Collins to get back healthy.
I actually think it might end up helping Stroud in their offense, kind of similar to when Cam Newton loses Kelvin Benjamin, forces them to distribute a lot more. This year, we haven't seen Stroud throw a ton to Tank Dell. The Diggs targets have gone up over the past couple of weeks, but if he can get everybody involved, Dalton Schultz as well, some of the younger guys like Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie, and then Nico Collins comes back, I think their offense can go to another level. But for me, I think the Packers are the more intriguing team in this game. Obviously, they get the win, but the game we just talked about, Detroit and Minnesota going down to the wire, I wonder how that division is going to stack up. Even the Bears are really good as well. They just had their bye week this week, I believe, so weren't involved in any contests. But the Bears were on, I think, a 3-game winning streak coming into the bye. All 4 of these teams are going to be really good down the stretch, we think. I'm not sure if the Bears will do as good versus good defenses, but it's going to be interesting to see how Green Bay stacks up with Detroit and Minnesota to me, because both of those teams are playing at a high level. And like you said, it's in 2 weeks that we see Detroit, or maybe 3 weeks. I don't remember what you said, but Detroit at Lambeau, it's going to be a pretty key game. The last key thing about that, though, Jared Goff in the outside weather, he's not going to have to go to Lambeau in January or December. So that might be a good scheduling perk for them there. Go ahead.
Well, I was about to say, we'll see who wins the division, because if Green Bay somehow pulls off the division, there could be a January game between the Packers and the Lions, which would be very exciting. But that'll play itself out throughout the rest of the season. One, I want to touch on the Chicago Bears really quickly, is we'll find out if they're pretenders or contenders very quickly, is after their bye. I think they have a 3-week stretch where they have several winnable games, but I think from weeks 11 to 18, they play all 6 of their division opponents, and then the Seahawks and 49ers. Those are 8 games that are going to be very hard, and the 49ers could be healthy then. The rest of your division is a complete juggernaut. So I think that will kind of be the litmus test for the Chicago Bears team.
And I think all 3, maybe not the Packers as much, but the Lions defense and the Vikings defense come to play. So I think that should be a good test for Caleb Williams, Shane Waldron, the whole group there. The last game we wanted to talk about was the Super Bowl rematch in the 4:00 window, the Chiefs versus the Niners. And I got to say, it was not nearly as glamorous as the Super Bowl was. A lot of sloppy plays. Purdy had either 2 or 3 interceptions. I want to say it was 3. And just all around, just bad, stinky play from both QBs. Mahomes is pretty close to the league leader in interceptions. I think it's Jordan Love. But sloppy play. The difference was Mahomes got it done on the ground. You see the one play where people say he's faking going out of bounds. He's not making like a fake motion. He just slowed down, and I think it was Dre Greenlaw flew past him, and he ran it for 30 more yards or something like that. It's those special kind of plays that, even though he's not getting it done through the air as efficiently as we're accustomed to seeing from him, he gets it done on the ground, and then he ends up running it in on a 4th and goal. Absolutely trucks this shredded safety that the 49ers have, Malik Mustafa. I think he's a rookie this year. That was a crazy type play, and that's the kind of play that galvanizes you and gets you ready for your next game. I saw something on Twitter yesterday, and it was looking at what is Patrick Mahomes' worst 6-game stretch from an EPA per play standpoint, or maybe it was EPA overall standpoint.
Yeah, Kevin Cole did that, and it was the one that the stretch that opened this year is his 3rd worst 6-week stretch, so to speak, and he's still positive.
And it's positive,
and expected points added. So
we're looking at him as if he's fallen off a cliff, right? But he's still at worst an average QB, like making the team do positive things. And this is without Rashee Rice. Juju Smith-Schuster, I believe, goes down in this game. Hollywood Brown, they haven't had all year, I don't think. Yeah, he didn't even play week 1. So he's doing it with backup replacement level guys. It's going to be interesting to see if they bring a receiver in, a Deontay Johnson. We heard today from Diana Rossini of The Athletic, Cooper Kupp is apparently available on the trade block, although the Rams want a second for him. I'm not sure if they're going to get that unless they take on like all of his salary. Maybe Deontay Johnson, Cooper Kupp, Thielen, any of these guys, DeAndre Hopkins, could be an option for the Chiefs moving forward. But on the other hand, San Francisco loses Brandon Ayuk for the season with an ACL tear. And Deebo Samuel misses this game with, I believe they said it was pneumonia, like fluid in the lungs.
Like illness.
He had an illness, And I'm not sure I'm not going to say I'm not sure. We are not sure if he's going to be able to go this week. And this is coming off Juwan Jennings being injured. So I wonder what their weapon situation is going to look like. Ricky Pearsall got his first playing time in this game, but they're going to have to figure some stuff out as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are 3 wide receivers probably moving forward over the next couple of weeks, given Deebo Samuel's health condition. You have Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, and Jacob Cohen. And those 3 guys now make up your top targets. You're still missing Christian McCaffrey, a guy that does a really good job at beating man coverage and giving you a quick outlet in the pass game. And right now, no defense that's playing the 49ers is afraid of kind of manning up against the 49ers. And that's been their big weakness over the past couple of years. So we've seen this work with Jim Schwartz, with Steve Spagnuolo. I think there's another defensive coordinator. It might be Brian Flores. But these defensive coordinators who love playing man coverage and are able to execute it well against this 49ers team, I think Kyle Shanahan has one win against all three of those defensive play callers. They've literally written the recipe for success against this offense. And if Kyle Shanahan doesn't learn how to evolve, this is going to look ugly very quickly, because Purdy does not look like the MVP people thought he was last year. You know why? Because he's an average quarterback that can make big NFL professional throws in an NFL offense. The thing is he needs all pros. He needs the Avengers. He needs all-stars at every single position to make it work. And okay, Sam Darnold could have done that. He's doing it right now in Minnesota. You have some of these journeyman quarterbacks who you can plug in and not pay $60 million a year. So this should at least be the lesson for the 49ers this year, is that our quarterback is not worth what he's asking.
I actually think prior to this Chiefs game that Purdy had improved his play from last year. But it's to your point, now he doesn't have all those pieces, right? George Kittle's playing out of his mind right now, but other than that, there's not a lot there. Jordan Mason and Garundo are proving that Shanahan can make anyone good runners, but you're missing the passing element that McCaffrey brings. McCaffrey's also a really good passive blocker as well. You're missing that as well. So it's going to be interesting. I'm looking at the 49ers schedule, and in division, they've already lost to the Rams and the Cardinals. Obviously, they shellacked the Seahawks on that Thursday night game, but coming up, they host the Cowboys. I think it's their bye week then. Then they go to Tampa Bay, who another team with a wide receiver turmoil there. But then Seahawks again. They should be better this time. The Packers, the Bills, then the Bears. If we're going to see if the Bears are good. Then after that, Rams, Dolphins, Lions. Then they end the year at the Cardinals. So I don't think it's a shoe-in by any means that this team wins the division. Now, I know you are a big proponent of the Seahawks winning the division. I think they're in first now following the win and loss discrepancy there. But a team like the Cardinals also won last night, so they could be on the come up as well. It's going to be really tough unless they can get people healthy, and I know Ayuk isn't coming back this year. It's going to be tough for them to make the Shanahan runs down the stretch that we are accustomed to seeing, especially when the Super Bowl is their expectation. So I think it's going to be really interesting looking at what the Niners do the next couple of weeks moving forward.
It's going to be extremely critical, because I think it's going to depend on whether these offseason bets and paying all of their stars was really worth it, because it sounded like the ownership and the rest of the front office weren't sold on the vision that Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch had for this roster. So we'll see how it pieces together. I will say, and it's always been a thought process of mine, because I appreciate how well Bill Belichick coached for nearly 2 decades. And it's better to be early by a year than late by a year. And what I mean by that is, when we were evaluating the 49ers and the Rams last year, before the 2023 season, we saw very old, injury-prone rosters. And we thought, hey, this could fall apart very quickly. Obviously, they have a lot of injury luck. They stay healthy throughout the whole season, and they're able to produce up to their potential. But now, as time has gone on, these age curves are starting to hit. The injuries are starting to pile up. And now the 2 teams at the bottom of the NFC West, from a record standpoint, and we still have a lot of football to go, are the 49ers and the Rams. So just to keep in mind, all these trade rumors with Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, the injuries in San Francisco, it looks like those 2 teams had just a brief, almost injury luck blip that helped them get to the success we saw last year, and that isn't sustainable moving forward.
Yeah, if I recall, they were the first and fourth healthiest, best injury luck teams last year, and that led to playoff berth for the Rams and Super Bowl appearance for the Niners. Obviously, it's not going this way now, but I will say I think the Rams activated Puka Nakua's practice window off of IR today, so maybe we'll see some of them the Rams get some of their reinforcements back. I don't know. Hopefully, he comes back for my fantasy team. But on to coach talk. I think there's only one big coach we want to talk about, or at least I wanted to talk about this week. I know you already mentioned Ben Johnson, but a lot of people gave Mike Tomlin the flack for the Russell Wilson decision, right? Justin Fields, I think his touchdown interception ratio was 10-2. They were 4-2. They had been winning games, not necessarily because of Justin Fields, but he was guiding them to wins. He wasn't making mistakes. And then Russ comes in as the starter, and everyone's like, oh my, what is Russ going to do? And in the first half, it looked really bad. Like Russ was dirting like short little out passes behind people. But then as the game went on in the second quarter and into the second half, they really got away from the Jets. And Russ was doing what he does best, throwing it way downfield to a receiver that can win contested catches in George Pickens, even though some of them were horrible throws, but it's George Pickens. He can reel them in, or he'll get a DPI call against the corner, and that helped galvanize them to a win. Najee Harris also had a very, very good game. The defense also had a good game. And you're also playing, I think, 41-year-old Rodgers, who I think we know now isn't at his peak anymore. But they still get a pretty dominant win. And Tomlin in the postgame presser, somebody else was like, oh, what about the pressure and starting Russ? How did you get to that? And he's like, well, that's why I'm well compensated. Thank you. And he left after that. Nice little joke. But it seems his decision paid off. I don't want to say they won because of Russ, because, again, George Pickens made the downfield plays on those catches. But Russ at least attempts those downfield shots, and I think that can open up a bit more for play caller Arthur Smith to work with the run game. What do you think going forward is going to be the best decision for the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback-wise?
Well, I mean, from a draft compensation standpoint, if you sit Justin Fields the rest of the year, just keep him as a backup, he'll stay fresh, that if anything happens with Russ, you have a guy that you know you can lean on. But aside from obviously the pick swaps, sending a sixth instead of a fourth in regards to Fields playing, I believe, 51% of the snaps, Russell Wilson, he didn't make a lot of mistakes, similar to Justin Fields, but the throws downfield were so-so. And if you're able to get one-on-one opportunities and consistently get those because of how effective the run game is starting to look with Najee Harris, with how Arthur Smith is layering these and timing these deep shots, I think you have a recipe for success, especially with how good their defense is on the other side. These are games where they can get into matchups where it's a 20-17 game where they're pulling it out. And Russell Wilson has experience in those situations. So I think having the veteran in that position isn't a bad idea. I think this is a guy that can get you the 10, maybe 11 wins, get you kind of that second spot in the AFC North and one of the first wild card spots in the AFC. Now, is that enough to go on a playoff run? I don't think so. But again, the Steelers are just that model for we are consistently good. They just haven't gotten that guy at quarterback who can take them to great.
Yeah, and I think their O-line will get healthier throughout the year, and that should come back and be a strength of their team. I know before the season, I think a lot of people, us included, thought it would be a strength, but young players and injured players it hasn't fallen apart, but they haven't been a top 5 unit by any means. Hopefully they can get people back to pair with that strong run game now that Najee Harris is delivering. I know they just got Jalen Warren back, who's their good pass catching back too. Maybe it'll all come together for Arthur Smith and the offense. Maybe they can pull off a sneaky playoff win, but I agree, until they get that actual franchise QB and, quite frankly, another receiver, because it is just George Pickens out there mossing Brandon Echols every other deep shot, I think the offense is limited. The other coach I wanted to talk about, and it's not a coach, but I throw up the air quotes because we know Jerry Jones is the decision maker in Dallas. Last night, we all watched the game where the Baltimore Ravens just dominated the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then today, on his daily, weekly radio appearance, because Jerry Jones does these things, there was a question about why didn't the Cowboys sign Derrick Henry, because there was apparent mutual interest over the offseason that Derrick Henry would want to play there. Cowboys would want to play him. And Jerry Jones's answers were, we couldn't afford him. If you look at what Ezekiel Elliott is making now, like on his current contract, and the old one where they signed him to that, I think it was like 84 over 6, something like that. The one that they're still paying him for. Combine those, make him more than Derrick Henry is one. And Jerry Jones said he doesn't fit what our system is. For a player like that, you change your system. Why are you saying these things? But then 4 months ago, I guess 4 or 5 months ago, it was, we're all in. It's a Super Bowl run. We are all in. Here you go, CeeDee Lamb before the season. Here you go, Dak Prescott, the day the season started. We're all in. But you don't sign any free agents other than Eric Kendricks. The players you drafted haven't come along quite yet. Tyler Guyton is experiencing a bit of a rookie curve, and that's to be expected. You can't trust all your rookies to a day one be stars like they have been for the Cowboys in the past. What is Jerry Jones up to, man? Like, what is the we're all in? And then why would you even go on the radio and say, oh, he doesn't fit what we're doing? Before you answer, here's the interesting stat for you. Derrick Henry himself has 10 touchdowns this year on offense. Do you know how many the Cowboys have on offense?
They have 9?
They have 10. Derrick Henry himself is producing the same amount of scoring as the Dallas Cowboys.
So before we get into the apples to oranges comparison, I will say Todd Monken is a top 5 play caller, and he's playing with a top 5 quarterback in Lamar Jackson, 2-time MVP, a guy that creates a lot of stress already on the defense from a run standpoint. So that has opened the door for Derrick Henry to be who Derrick Henry's been this year. To the point that Jerry Jones is making about salary, this, that, the third, the Cowboys have never been free agent spenders, and Derrick Henry was one of the top paid running backs this past offseason. So it didn't make sense necessarily for them to go after a running back like that. Obviously, like you said, it looks like a double standard when you go, oh, we're all in the offseason, and then now you're kind of doubling down and saying, like, no, like I didn't really say that, and we didn't really need this guy in the room, and this, that, the third. Like, it doesn't help Jerry Jones' case. And a lot of people know that he's not really been like himself of the past few years, just with him getting older. I mean, there's already a lot of talk over the past decade. Stephen Jones has done more of the operations. And I think there is a clear line right around 2014 when you have Jerry Jones really interested in Johnny Manziel, and they go, no, we're going to draft Zach Martin. And that, I think, was a true philosophical pivot change that we've seen with that front office. Now, to make this a little bit more about coach talk and wrap it up on this segment, is that Mike McCarthy has a lot of work to do, and that has to start with the 49ers this week. You want to rebuild your reputation, prove that you deserve to stay in Dallas. You need to put together a game plan on both the offense and defensive side that is going to put you in a position to win. Hopefully they get guys like Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence back in the lineup on defense. They need to figure out a game plan where they can protect Dak Prescott and get the ball to their playmakers. I mean, Jake Ferguson, Jalen Tolbert, the secondary, tertiary receiving options really need to step up for this offense to be functional. And Mike McCarthy's got to be more creative. He took a lot of things out of the Dolphins playbook and a few other NFL offenses around the league last year when the offense was stagnating. He either needs to play copycat again this year, or he needs to figure out ways to get his guys open within the system that's already set up. So Mike McCarthy has a long way to go. Mike Tomlin, on the other hand, phenomenal job as always, will not have another losing season as the way it's looking this year. And that's just a testament to not only good coaching, but good leadership. And I think a lot of people got confused, and I'm bringing this back to Canales because this is a Canales hate episode with his hypotheticals, is that you can be a great communicator, you can be a great leader, but that only goes so far. You still have to know the X's and O's. You still have to be a good coach, and you have to marry those two together in order to have the combination that you have in Pittsburgh.
For sure. 18 season. This is Tomlin's 18th season. He's been doing this. No losing seasons. One of the best. The last thing I'll say about the Cowboys is, one, Derrick Henry is on pace for over 2,100 rushing yards. Don't think he's going to keep that up, but really good player. I think he could fit into your system if you made it work. And two,
100%. Yeah, I'm just saying, I don't know if he gets that kind of production outside of Baltimore, which is like the big, just like, hold on, asterisk kind of situation.
The other thing I would say is, you said they need to have a good game plan on offense and defense. I'm going to stress the defensive part because what's the weakness that we see on the Dallas defense?
They get run over all the time. They don't know how to
and
get
who's
bigger.
One of the best run scheming coordinators in the league?
Kyle
Shanahan. So that's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be like stoppable force versus movable object, especially with all the injuries on offense for the Niners. Future Panthers, because we are in draft mode now. It's over. You know, this season has become a hypothetical, the rest of the games, if you want to look at it that way. And we've talked about some of the top end prospects. I know I talked about some edge players, D-line players, but you've put together a good graphic courtesy of Joseph Hefner, friend of the show. His shiny app, this is one of the apps there, and it shows like the 53-man roster. Obviously, it's not 53 people because these are the people under contract for the 2025 season. And as you can see, for the YouTube folks, only 30 people under contract. Now, obviously, you're going to have minimum guys that come in. Your specialists are going to be cheap. We're going to draft probably, 7 to 8 people. Then you have a couple UDFAs. So we'll fill out the 53-man roster. But there are key areas of need when you look at it like this that the team has to address. And the big one's quarterback, obviously. Is Bryce Young going to be the guy of the future? If Canales stays, and I truly think you shouldn't fire Canales or Dan Morgan after 1 year, because that's just going to keep repeating the cycle of jumping the gun, I think. He doesn't seem to have faith in Bryce Young, so Bryce Young's quarterback's going to be a hole. Center is going to be a hole as well. Austin Corbett's a free agent coming up. Brady Christensen, who has filled in admirably for him, he's a free agent as well. And then on the offensive side of the ball as well, more tight end depth and more receiver depth, especially with a guy like Adam Thielen, who could be a cap casualty, could be a Kansas City Chief in a couple of weeks. We don't know. There are a lot of holes on offense that need to be addressed. And the quarterback's the big one. But me personally, with the way the team is built, if you look at the defense, I'd be going defense early in the draft.
A lot of people on Panthers Twitter would agree with that sentiment. I think the big thing is when we're looking at the 30 people currently under contract for 2025, there are a few people on this list who are going to be cap casualties next offseason that are cuts. And then there are players that are currently not under contract that will get extended. And I think 1 or 2 of those guys are going to be Austin Corbett and Brady Christensen. They showed their investment into the offensive line last year, and I don't think that they're going to go away from that, especially with how successful that unit's been. When you look at the wide receiver room, Deontay Johnson is not under contract. He doesn't look happy. Shipping him out for a pick leaves you in a position where your wide receiver room is bare bones. And Adam Thielen, I think, again, is one of those guys where he's a cap casualty. And Miles Sanders in the running back room, he's a cap casualty. Is Chuba Hubbard going to be too expensive to where we can't bring him back or shouldn't bring him back in theory? Then I think the main concerns, like what we're talking about and what you alluded to, are really on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, for those of you who aren't watching, our current projected edge rushers under contract for next year are Jadeveon Clowney, DJ Johnson, Mari Barno, DJ Wanham. 2 of those guys, I think you can pen in as draft busts by the Panthers. Jadeveon Clowney's in his 30s, hasn't seen a year of over 70% of snaps in quite some time. I think it's getting close to half a decade now, and he's just not a down-to-down edge rusher. And then you have DJ Wanham, who hasn't played a single snap for us in a Panthers uniform. So that's not a good group. And then the interior, you have guys like Ashawn Robinson, Shai Tuttle, who were brought in to be space eaters, guys that could help in the run game. And you have Derek Brown coming back from injury. So the interior of the defensive line doesn't concern me as much as the edge. But this is where I think when we talk about future Panthers and the defense being an area of concern, because I'm not as concerned about the second level. I think that can be addressed in free agency, later rounds. But having a premier edge rusher to replace some of the production we've lost over the past couple of years, and a guy like Brian Burns and Hassan Reddick, who's that go-to? Who's that guy that's going to be able to rack off 10, 20 sacks in a year, get after the quarterback, and make his life hell down in and down out?
Amari Barnett. Nah, I'm just kidding. Another thing for me is when we look at this defensive group, and we only have 13 under contract for next season. Obviously that's going to get addressed. It'll get up to 25 or whatever we carry into the year. I think the scheme that Ejiro Evero runs, the 34 odd front, where we don't have a nose tackle, which is like you need to have a nose tackle if you're going to run an odd front in the NFL. I wonder if the next defensive coordinator, because I'm not sure that Coach Evero will be retained this offseason. He is under contract, but I'm not sure they'll bring him back. Maybe Robert Saleh, he runs an even front. I wonder if they're going to go more 4-3, traditional, 2 interior, 2 edge rushers, and then you can have people come off the edge like a Luvu would or something like that. When I look at the roster we have now, I think we're fit to do that more, like go to an even front than we are our current defensive front scheme. So it would be interesting to me if we bring in somebody else, or I guess the interesting part is who is calling the defense and that's going to lead into who we end up drafting. Because if you look at defensive linemen like Mason Graham, yes, he's excellent, but if we continue to be an odd front, we don't have a nose tackle, and then he can't be so good if you don't have a nose tackle that can fit against the run, So that's going to lead to edge rusher. If we stay as we are we going to get an outside linebacker, like a smaller, skinnier guy like James Pierce, who terrorized Alabama this past weekend? a fast guy that can get around the edge, or are you going to go with a guy like Mykel Williams at Georgia if you go to an even front, a guy who's a bit bigger, he can hold up, set the edge better, and push through the offensive line? Those are the questions I want to see answered. I don't think we're going to see them answered throughout the season. I'm not sure why you would or if they would fire Coach Evero or any assistants in season. Don't see why, because I don't think it can get any better just with the personnel we have. But those are the questions I think that would lead to more answers as to who the Panthers would target in the draft. The other thing, like you talked about, I am pretty not satisfied with, I wouldn't say that, but I'm less worried about the secondary, even though we currently only have one safety under the roster. Travis Hunter, if we end up with that first overall pick, that's tantalizing to have JC Horn and Travis Hunter in the same defensive secondary and have him play like 5 snaps at wide receiver throughout the game or something like that. But it's going to be, but you obviously can't run two-way in the NFL as effectively as he does in college. Plays 100 snaps a game when he's healthy. But for me, like, that's the clear number one player in the class. If they stay there, if they pick Travis Hunter, they still got to address the front, I guess is my point.
I think the point you made about the switch from an uneven front to an even front is a very interesting point, because it goes back to how some of the Panthers' previous draft classes have elicited so many busts. And it's because you draft a certain player, a certain prospect, because you're running a certain scheme going into that year. Then all of a sudden you have a new coaching staff that has an entirely new scheme, and that player doesn't fit it. And then all of a sudden the player looks like a bust when that player doesn't necessarily fit that coach's scheme. And I think the biggest example of that is Ike Ekwonu. He gets drafted by Matt Rule, Scott Fitterer. You bring in Ben McAdoo as your offensive play caller, and you play a lot of power run. You build play designs off of that. But then Frank Reich comes in, and you're looking for more of a pass protection left tackle. You're looking for somebody that can take away that edge presence. And had that been the case, had Frank Reich been the head coach at that time when that pick was taken, maybe we take a Charles Cross. And those are those situations where when you don't allow, like you said, Dave Canales and Dan Morgan to kind of play out for the next year or two, you can't really build an identity, because it's always flipping flop back and forth. And it goes back to this point that, okay, so say we decide that we're going to stay in the odd front that we currently have in the 3-4, and we go for maybe a smaller guy like a James Pierce, like you're saying. Well, what happens when we go to a 4-3 the next year? Then he's undersized and he's not fitting that role in that type that we're drafting him to be. And so I think it's detrimental, like you said, to necessarily just throw in the towel with his current coaching staff and front office. There's a lot to be upset and mad with them about. But when you do that, that's the implications from a roster standpoint, is that some of these players that you're drafting don't pan out. And it's because of that constant revolving door with coaches and the general manager.
For sure. To your Icky point, I think he's actually progressed quite a bit this year. And you know why?
Good. He does.
You know why? Because we are building the offense off of the run, and he's moving well with that. I think he's actually evolved quite a bit in pass pro. I'm just going to accept that he's going to have a false start in the first drive every game. It just seems to happen. But if he keeps putting forth good pass pro performances, I think it's worth it. And then the last point I want to make about switching odd fronts and even fronts, it doesn't even go back to the coaches. Remember who initially switched our defensive front when this person arrived in Carolina?
Well, there was talks because Ron Rivera did it his last year, but yeah, it was Tepper.
Yeah, it was Tepper. Tepper was the one who wanted
Snow
to switch
was brought in as a coach, and he ran, I think, good
I
odd front with Brian Burns, Hassan Reddick. I love that. The NASCAR packages we were rolling out with some of those schemes were fun, but like you said, when going back to Canales' press conference, we need to get back to the basics and stop the run. Well, maybe you should have 4 down linemen. Maybe that'll help with the gap control.
Or if you're running an odd front, a nose tackle that can eat 2 blockers at once and allow A'Shawn Robinson and Tuttle, because I don't think Tuttle is big or stout enough to play nose tackle, to then work one-on-ones. But that's neither here nor there. Let's blame the front switch on Tepper when he got here. Remember that when Ron Rivera started calling the plays because that switch wanted to take place? I remember that. Anyway, moving forward, We talked about a couple draft prospects. We'll get more in depth as the season goes on when we really want to nail what player fits what role. And we've seen more tape from them. Like we talked about Pierce and Michael Walker, both put on excellent shows this weekend. Obviously, Tennessee beats Alabama, and Georgia goes to Texas and upsets them, really embarrasses them for most of the game. There was a huge controversial penalty call in that game. I'm sure you've seen it all over Twitter where they called pass interference, and then all the Texas fans were throwing water bottles, throwing beer onto the field, and the refs, I guess, in fear for their lives, just picked up the flag 10 minutes later and said, no pass interference, which is just bizarre to me. That's a crazy precedence to set. Hopefully, this weekend, the Panthers can set a new precedence of winning because it's another afternoon, like late afternoon game. I'm starting to like these now because you can watch Red Zone for the first quarter of games or first 3 hours of games, not get depressed, and then get depressed when you watch the Panthers. They go to Denver, 2 Mile High, to play the Denver Broncos. This one, again, this could be a winnable game. It could. You know why? Because Bo Nix stinks. That's our win condition, is to keep him bad, but their defense is also the best in the league right now from an EPA perspective.
They've been the best over the past, I think, like 4 or 5 weeks. When we look at the season as a whole, I believe they're second in expected points added per play and third in success rate. Patrick Surtain is a big reason why they've been able to generate pressure with their edge presence. And that's kind of crazy to think about when they've shipped out guys like Von Miller and Bradley Chubb over the past few years. And just their ability to draft and develop those guys has been really impressive. They are playing cohesive as a unit with Vance Joseph as the helm. And you couldn't really say that last year when Sean Payton took over with the Broncos. I thought their defense was probably one of the weaker points of the team, and now it's a strength. In regards to Bo Nix, there are definitely those just head-scratching plays he makes routinely every week. This past week, Monday night against the Saints, he threw a perfectly great ball between 2 open wide receivers. Like, I have never seen a throw that well layered between 2 open guys. It's mind-baffling.
It's Will Levis meme level type stuff.
It is, but you don't have pick sixes because of it.
Right.
So I guess like that's the saving grace, is it just falls as an incompletion and just looks like a completely dumb play. It's like a Daniel Jones. You have your Daniel Jones, your Will Levises, and now you're going to have your Bo Nixes. But what I will say in defense of Bo Nix is there's a metric that I'm starting the run with and work with. And when a quarterback leaves the pocket, not because of a rollout, not because of a system design, he is simply either scrambling to get out or he feels pressure and he's leaving the pocket. His create rate and his EPA per play in those instances are pretty good from a league standpoint. And then when you look at his pressure to sack ratio, it's one of the best in the NFL. This is a guy that knows how to mitigate negative plays. And the more that he can do that, the more this team is just going to keep rattling off wins. Because if he's not giving the defense another opportunity to go make a play, which is something our defense needs, then what's going to happen is our offense is going to make a mistake against their defense, which it has the past couple of weeks against probably worse defenses than the Broncos. That's when you're able to lean on and then just hand the ball off to Javonte Williams. We have one of the worst run defenses in the league, and he got going against the Saints. He'll probably get going against us. And so I think the recipe for success is you have to limit the turnovers. If you can win the turnover battle as the Carolina Panthers, you have a shot in this game. Is that going to be possible? I don't think so, but that is kind of the road to success. And then the other thing is you got to put Andy Dalton in advantageous situations. He's not reading the field all that well, so you need to get him on rollouts. You need to get him on these RPO glances where he has the ability to fire into a tight end or a wide receiver in space and allow our playmakers to go make a play. You made the point earlier, JT Sanders, it felt like he wasn't really getting any yak. We weren't targeting Xavier Legette, who is a yak monster. Like, those are the kind of players that we need to step up and get the ball in order to have a chance against the Broncos in Mile High. Do I think we're going to have a chance? No. I think it's going to look a lot similar to last week, and that'll kind of lead into my take. But are there any final thoughts that you have in regards to the matchup that we have in Denver?
Yeah, it's pretty disadvantageous to the Panthers, right? They're at home. Mile High is a notoriously tough place to play because of the elevation, the breathing factor. It's a real thing. Like, I don't know if you've been to Colorado before, but when you first get there, the breathing it's a little bit different, you know. They're off a rest advantage too. They played on Thursday, so they get 11 days versus 7 days of rest and recovery, all that. You mentioned Javonte Williams is finally getting rolling. I think that's going to be a big factor as well. I don't really see it for us, and I hope I'm not stealing your take because you said it was related, and I had to look at odds real quick in order for mine to hit, or in order for my take to be developed. But my take is that we're gonna not only hit the under in this game, which is set at 43.5 by FanDuel. The under in this game is going to go under 40 because I think this is going to be a very, very low scoring affair. I might say it's going to go under 36. I think it's going to end up being under 38. It's going to be like a 17-10 game, something like that. I think the Denver offense has a chance to make a ton of mistakes. I think our defense isn't going to be able to stop them. And then on the reverse side, we're going to have to pound the ball heavy, but their defense isn't going to allow a ton through the air. So I don't think there's going to be a lot of scoring. Let's just say under 38 is going to be my take for this week. And you're smiling. I hope I didn't take it from you.
Not my take. My only thing is the Panthers defense has allowed 30-plus points in 5 out of 7 contests this year. So the Broncos alone, based on just how our defense has been playing, could well exceed that. And it could have nothing to do with the Panthers offense.
You know what it could be? This is what it's going to be. Andy Dalton's going to throw 2 pick sixes. And then that's going to push the total points over that 38. But I'm riding with it.
I think that's a good take. It's one of those, I don't know if it's perfect. We'll see how it plays out. Mine is going to actually relate to the graphic that I posted. And for those of you who are not watching on YouTube, we talked earlier about how some of the worst Panthers performances have happened not only this year, but under David Tepper's kind of regime era over the past 5.5, 6, 7 years. And so when we look at kind of net efficiency, I think this game will go down as top 10 in terms of worst. So we've already seen 3 this year. The first was the New Orleans game. The second one was the Washington game. And at 8 was the Chargers game. I don't see anything good on film with Andy Dalton. And the Commanders' defense was a lot worse than the Broncos' defense. So if Dave Canales does not switch anything up this week, Vance Joseph is going to only magnify the issues we saw last week. And to me, that's all that the Broncos need. Sean Payton hung 30 points on the Saints last week. I think he'll want to do it against the team he faced multiple times as the Saints head coach and the Carolina Panthers, especially how we kind of did them dirty a little bit in the late 2000s and then some during the Cam era. There's still a little bit of animosity there if I had to guess. So that is my take, is I think this goes down as a top 10 worst performance since 2011 and joins 3 other performances we've already seen this year.
And again, for those not watching on YouTube, this graphic gets posted to our Twitter probably like once a week now, just because that's how many times we end up putting these horrible performances up there. So speaking of Twitter, you can follow us on Twitter, like our posts, anything we talk about during the pods, the graphics, the videos, they go up on the Twitter. So head over there. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're on YouTube. Like, dislike, do whatever you got to do to follow us and get your Panthers takes here. But for myself, for Steven, you have anything else?
I think that's about it.
All right. Keep pounding, and we will see you guys next week after another Panthers loss.